Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
You ever get labeled as the toxic one in your family just because you don't put up with bullshit? I mean, not overtly. They don't scream it at you or write it on a sticky note, but they say it in smiles, in passive comments, in fake concern and weaponized kindness. That's how my sister Jessica did it. We were sitting at the Thanksgiving table, the smell of burnt marshmallows on sweet potatoes lingering in the air, my dad talking about some Civil War battle no one asked about, and the kids arguing over the last slice of pecan pie. Jessica had just topped off her second glass of Prosecco when she turned to me, with that serene little smirk she wears when she's about to swing a knife and pretend it's a hug, and she said, "Rachel, I think it might be healthier for everyone if you sat out of these events for a while." I mean, the kids are starting to notice how negative you always are. Now, let me paint this clearly. This wasn't said in private. This wasn't a concerned heart-to-heart after dinner. No, she said it right there, in front of her husband, her kids, my father, two of our cousins, and some guy her son brought over who smelled like vape juice and Axe body spray. There was a long silence. One of the cousins tried to clear their throat, someone tapped their fork against their glass, and I, being the designated family emotional sponge, just smiled. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask her to explain herself. I didn't ask which part of negative she meant, the way I bring up how she manipulates dad for money. Or maybe how I paid off their mortgage when her husband lost his job and never once got a thank you card. Or did she mean negative like when I reminded her that mom's death wasn't an excuse to rewrite family history and pretend she was the perfect daughter? I sat there, chewed a green bean casserole that tasted like wet cardboard, and smiled like it didn't matter. But inside, something turned off. You ever feel a switch get flipped in your gut? Not rage, not sadness, just a cold, quiet sense that you're done playing your part in the little skit your family insists on calling tradition? That was me. I looked around that table and realized I've spent the last 30 years stitching this family together like some unpaid therapist meets accountant hybrid, and for what? So I could be labeled the negative one for not swallowing lies and pretending everything's fine? I helped raise Jessica's kids when she was deep in postpartum depression and her husband was too busy figuring himself out in the garage. I gave up vacations to cover emergencies. I drafted my will to make sure her children, my niece and nephew, would have a financial cushion when they turned 18. I even let her stay at my place for a month after her so-called spiritual retreat ended with her car getting repoed. And still, I was the problem. After dinner, she came up to me in that phony sweet, condescending tone that could curdle milk and said, "Don't take it personally, Ratch. We're just trying to protect the family energy. It's about the vibe." The vibe. That's what it came down to. I had spent my adulthood protecting her from every damn consequence imaginable, and now I was being uninvited from the tribe because I disrupted the vibe. I drove home that night in silence. No music, no phone calls. Just headlights stretching along the cold pavement and the low hum of rage buzzing beneath my ribs. And somewhere between mile marker 56 and the gas station near the county line, I realized I wasn't mad. I was free. The truth is, they never respected me. They tolerated me when they needed me and dismissed me when they didn't. And Jessica? She's always been the golden one. The one mom used to defend no matter what, even when she stole from dad's safe that one summer and blamed it on the neighbor kid. The one who got pregnant at 19 and somehow became a symbol of resilience, while I, the one who paid my way through law school, stayed out of trouble and built a career, was the cold, uptight one. Well, cold has its benefits. Because unlike warmth, cold preserves. It remembers. It doesn't forgive easily, and it doesn't forget betrayal dressed up as sisterly concern. That night, I poured a glass of scotch, sat down at my desk, and pulled out the folder labeled Trust. I'd had it drawn up back when Emma was born, a simple revocable trust that would give each of Jessica's kids enough money for college, maybe even a down payment on their first homes. It was generous. Too generous, now that I looked at it with clear eyes. I opened a second folder, my will. Jessica was listed as my secondary beneficiary, in the event I died without updating the paperwork. That changed quickly. I made a few calls the next morning. Nothing dramatic. Just clean, quiet adjustments. I'm a lawyer, after all, I know how to make these things airtight. By noon, Jessica was out of the will. By evening, I'd called the trustee managing the kids' accounts and instructed them to pause all distributions pending a full review. Is there a dispute? The trustee asked. No, I replied. There's clarity. The best part? No one noticed. Not immediately. That's the thing about revenge when it's done right. It doesn't explode, it unfolds. And that silence? That's the sound of control returning to its rightful owner. The text started rolling in 4 days later. First from Jessica, feigning concern. Hey, haven't heard from you. Are you okay? Then from Dad, Rachel, your sister says you're upset. Want to talk? I ignored them. 1 week in, I got a group text from Jessica's husband. Did you change something with the trust? We're having trouble accessing funds for Ben's tuition deposit. I read that message 3 times. Smiled. Then turned off my phone. They called me negative. Fine. Let's see how they handle the silence. The thing about revenge, real, methodical, irreversible revenge, is that it doesn't come wrapped in flames and fury like people imagine. No, the most effective revenge walks in wearing a tailored blazer, holding signed paperwork, and smiling at the notary. It's clean, legal, and irreversible once set in motion. And that's exactly the path I chose when I sat down that Monday morning in my home office, flipped open my legal pad, and began what I now think of as my quiet war, not with fists or words, but with signatures and precision. I had given those kids, Emma and Ben, more than their parents ever acknowledged. Not just money, not just future security, but hours of my life, tutoring sessions, school interviews, rides home when their mom was too busy taking care of her energy, and their dad was on his 5th career pivot that year. And no one told me to do it. I did it because I believed that if I could give them something stable, something real, they wouldn't grow up to be soft, self-serving manipulators like their mother. I see now how naive that was. Generosity without boundaries turns into entitlement, and I had trained that whole family to expect a cushion for every bad decision. That morning, the trustee, a straight-shooting woman named Margot who'd been overseeing the trust for over a decade, sounded surprised when I called. Rachel, I haven't heard from you in ages, she said, her voice cheerful and oblivious. The kids' trust is operating smoothly. Is everything all right? I could have lied, but I didn't. I told her that after a recent family event, I was reevaluating all ongoing distributions, and that I wanted a full audit before any further funds were released. I made it clear that I wasn't accusing the children of wrongdoing, but rather reassessing the original purpose of the trust in light of new relational dynamics. Margot, of course, wasn't there at Thanksgiving. She didn't hear my sister weaponize mental wellness as a polite way to exile me from my own family table. She didn't see the performative concern and the way everyone else silently agreed, because keeping the peace often means sacrificing the person who refuses to play along. I didn't expect Margot to understand, and I didn't need her to. She just had to follow instructions. Which she did, efficiently, with a quiet, understood, Rachel. I'll halt distributions until I hear from you. There's something strange, almost exhilarating, about pulling the financial rug out from under someone you know has never stood on their own 2 feet. Jessica had lived her whole adult life like the world owed her soft landings. Every time her husband failed at another venture, from artisanal candles to digital consulting, she'd land on her feet because someone like me was there to catch them. They called it family support. I called it a pattern. And now that pattern was ending. I revised my will that same day. I didn't do it out of spite, I did it out of clarity. Jessica was removed entirely. In her place, I listed several charities I actually care about, literacy programs, foster youth legal aid, food banks, all of which would do more good in a single month than Jessica had managed in her whole lifetime. I kept the language neutral. No need for dramatics or messy accusations. Legally, she was simply no longer my concern. Later that afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, a pile of documents before me, and found myself staring at a photo on the fridge. Emma, maybe age 6, covered in chocolate, laughing in my arms at the pumpkin patch. For a second, just a breath of a moment, I felt that old guilt start to whisper. The guilt women like me are trained to carry, like a purse we never put down. What if they blame me for hurting the kids? What if this makes me just as cruel as Jessica? But then I remembered the Thanksgiving table. I remembered the way Emma looked away when Jessica called me negative, the way not one person pushed back or even glanced in my direction with discomfort. That silence spoke volumes. They had already chosen their narrative. I was the problem. And if that's the story they were so eager to tell, then I would make sure it had a damn good ending. By the third day, the phone started buzzing lightly at first. A text from Jessica, "Hey sis, got a weird call from the trustee? Everything okay?" I didn't respond. 6 hours later, another message, this one longer and dressed in faux concern. "I'm worried about you, Rachel. I hope this isn't because of our little misunderstanding at dinner. Let me know if you need to talk." Misunderstanding. As if calling someone too negative in front of their family isn't a public execution of their value. As if years of emotional labor can be dismissed with a wine-soaked insult and a tidy smile. I didn't respond to that one either. Day 4. A voicemail from her husband, who sounded less polite. "Hi, Rachel. I'm not sure what's going on, but we can't access the trust account for Ben's tuition. Please give me a call when you get this." No warmth, no checking in, just a transaction as if I were an ATM that had suddenly decided to grow a spine. I let the message sit. What I didn't expect was the call from my father. I was pouring myself coffee when his name lit up my phone. Carl. 75, widowed, retired history teacher who still believed World War II metaphors solved everything. He'd been silent since Thanksgiving. I assumed he was just staying out of it. But here he was, now calling me, probably at Jessica's urging. I didn't pick up. Instead, I let it go to voicemail, then stood frozen in my kitchen for a few minutes before finally playing it on speaker. "Rachel, hey. It's Dad. Look, I know things got weird at dinner, and I know Jessica said some things that hurt you. But freezing the kids' accounts? That's not you. That's not the daughter your mother raised. Can we talk? Please?" It was that last line that got me. Not the begging. I'd heard plenty of that in my career. It was the reference to mom. The daughter your mother raised. Funny how quickly people invoke the dead when they want to manipulate the living. I stared at the fridge again, the photo of Emma still crooked, still smiling, still 6 years old and innocent. And I thought, maybe this is who I was all along. Not the cold one. Not the negative one. Just the one who finally decided that unconditional love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect forever. The trust fund was frozen. The will was changed. And I had just gotten started. If you've never intentionally removed yourself from a family, I'll tell you this. It doesn't happen in a single motion, like slamming a door or blocking a number, and it doesn't feel dramatic at first. In fact, it feels frighteningly quiet. Like turning off the power in an old house and realizing for the first time how much noise the fridge and heater and ticking clocks had been making all along. When I vanished, and I use that word without apology, I didn't scream, I didn't write a tearful letter, and I didn't sit anyone down to explain myself. I just left, without ceremony or closure, because I had come to understand that not all exits are meant to be noticed immediately. Some are meant to be felt later, in the echo of your absence, in the space you used to fill, in the silence after your name is said and no one answers. The first thing I did was delete the family group chat. Not leave it. Delete it. I had created it years ago to coordinate birthday dinners, holiday travel, school events for the kids, and emergency updates for our father's health when he had his heart scare. That thread, once full of LOLs and passive-aggressive emojis, had become a digital monument to my middle child syndrome, the way I'd always tried to keep the chaos controlled and the people connected. I stared at the thread for a few seconds, thumb hovering, and then pressed delete conversation. The effect was instant and final. No explanation, no digital breadcrumbs, no trail to follow. Gone. Next came the blocking. I didn't do it impulsively or with rage. I did it with the same deliberate calm I use when I redact sensitive documents at work. Jessica was the first. Then her husband. Then the kids, even though that part made my stomach twist, not because I hated them, but because I realized I was done being the emotional safety net for people raised to believe I owed them something simply because we shared blood. Dad, I didn't block, not yet. I couldn't bring myself to shut that door, not completely. But I turned off voicemail transcription, put him on Do Not Disturb, and told myself I'd revisit the decision later, when the dust had settled or, more honestly, when I cared a little less. In the space that followed, I found something I hadn't expected: peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't come wrapped in apologies or explanations, the kind that just sits with you like an old friend who doesn't ask questions. I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes. I stopped composing imaginary responses in my head. I stopped scanning my inbox for guilt-laced subject lines. And in that silence, I started to remember myself, not the version they had painted, the too negative, too critical, too cold caricature, but the woman I had fought hard to become. One who had survived the weight of other people's expectations without ever being allowed to name her own needs. It was around this time that I reached out to Uncle Dan, my mother's brother, the only person in our family tree who had ever called things by their real names. Dan, who was now retired and living alone in a small coastal town 2 states over, picked up my call on the first ring, his voice gravelly and warm, like a fireplace that had been waiting for you to sit down. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not out of estrangement but because life, as it tends to do, had convinced me that I didn't have time for the people who actually understood me. "Rachel," he said, "I was starting to think you'd been abducted by aliens or married a billionaire and gone off-grid." I told him what happened, the Thanksgiving moment, the trust fund freeze, the silence. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't twist the story to make myself the heroine. I laid it all out, the ugliness and the exhaustion and the decision that finally tipped me over the edge. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I'll never forget. "Your mother tried to cut Jessica out of her will once," he said, casually, like he was offering me a beer or asking if I wanted cream in my coffee. I blinked. "What?" "Yep," he said. "It was about 10 years before she passed. She came to me, asked if I knew a good estate lawyer. She said Jessica had gotten her to co-sign on a loan for some MLM pyramid scheme, essential oils or vitamin supplements, I can't remember. When your mom found out she'd been lied to, she was livid. Said she wanted to remove her from the will completely. Even told me she was worried Jessica would bleed the family dry if she didn't put up some kind of guardrail." I sat in stunned silence, memories crashing into each other like waves. I remembered Mom's anxious energy, the way she sometimes clutched her wrists when Jessica was around, how she never seemed truly relaxed unless Jessica wasn't in the room. I remembered a drawer in Mom's bedroom that she always locked, the one she said had documents in it, but never said more. And then I remembered the day we read her will after the funeral, how Jessica had gotten a generous cut, equal to mine, no questions asked. I had accepted it as inevitable. But now? Now I wondered what had happened in those final years to change her mind. Or if someone else had changed it for her. Dan sighed on the other end of the line. "Your mom never went through with it. Guilt, probably. Or exhaustion. You know how she was always trying to be fair even when it killed her." That line stuck with me, trying to be fair even when it killed her. That was what I had been doing for years, giving the benefit of the doubt, smoothing over drama, being the strong one, the sensible one, the ATM, the taxi, the emergency contact, the free therapist, and the designated villain when things went sideways. No more. By the end of the week, I had canceled our shared family storage unit account, the one under my name that Jessica used for her seasonal decorations. I had unlinked my Netflix from their devices. I had called the credit card company and removed myself as the emergency cosigner from the card she opened for gas money. One by one, I pulled every plug that had kept her household running from the shadows. And still, they didn't call me directly, not yet. Instead, they tried to call through friends, through distant cousins, through social media. A cousin messaged me on Facebook, "Hey, not sure what's going on, but Jess is really worried about you." Worried. The way a queen is worried about a servant who no longer shows up with her tea. I ignored it all. I had vanished, yes, but I wasn't lost. In fact, I had never felt more found. What none of them understood yet, What they were just beginning to feel in the gaps and inconveniences and the growing financial strain was that I had never needed them. But they had always needed me. And now, for the first time in decades, they were going to have to learn what it meant to go without me. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream, doesn't wail, doesn't even shed tears the way people expect. It just settles deep into the chest like wet cement, heavy, immovable, and somehow more permanent than rage or grief. And for me, that kind of heartbreak arrived in the form of a voicemail from my father. Now, I'm not naive. I've been in enough courtrooms, enough depositions, and enough backhanded family dinners to know how easily people shift loyalties when their comfort is threatened, but nothing prepared me for the sound of my father's voice, soft and strained, asking if I was really willing to let the family fall apart over this. As if I was the one who tore it down. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I pulled the plug on everything, the trust fund distributions, the joint accounts, the access to my will, the family group chat, the auto payments I'd set up to keep Jessica's bills from slipping into collections, all of it. And in those 2 weeks, the silence from their end had shifted from passive discomfort to active panic. I hadn't responded to a single text. I hadn't called anyone back. I'd disappeared from the background of their lives, and now that the consequences were showing up in the form of unpaid tuition deposits and bounced subscription charges, they were realizing that the woman they once labeled too negative was, in fact, the person who'd been silently lubricating the entire machinery of their comfort for years. Dad's first voicemail had been cautious, almost diplomatic. "Rachel, I know you're upset," he began, pausing awkwardly like he wasn't sure if that was the right word or if maybe he should have said unhinged or irrational instead. "Your sister, well, she's not perfect. You know that. But she's family. We're all trying our best here, and this thing with the trust fund, it's scaring her. The kids are scared too. Let's just talk. Please." I didn't delete the message. I didn't save it either. I just listened to it once, then stared out my window at the empty street, the leaves spinning in the wind like little reminders of things that fall apart when the weather turns. 3 days later, he called again, and this time the tone had shifted. Less gentle, more pointed. "I just don't understand why you'd want to hurt the children. They haven't done anything to you. This isn't like you, Rachel." That phrase, "this isn't like you," is a weapon disguised as concern. It's what people say when you stop performing the role they assigned you, when you step out of the script they handed you at birth and say, "Actually, no. I'm not going to be the reliable one, the fixer, the one who absorbs everything quietly and asks for nothing in return." I had heard it before, in other forms, from other people, but hearing it from my father hit different. It wasn't that I expected him to defend me. I had long ago accepted that he was the kind of man who kept his head down and his hands clean, a peacemaker by default, a historian who preferred dates and facts over emotions and discomfort. But I suppose a small, stubborn part of me had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he'd recognize what was really happening. That he'd remember how many times I'd stepped in when Jessica disappeared for days. That he'd acknowledge how many bills I covered without asking, how many arguments I mediated, how many times I bit my tongue to keep the peace. But instead, he chose the easier narrative, that I had snapped, that I had overreacted, that I was punishing the innocent out of some childish vendetta. I was the negative one after all. Hadn't Jessica already planted that seed at the Thanksgiving table? And like all good myths, it had started to grow roots in the fertile ground of his fear and discomfort. It wasn't long before the messages started coming from other sources, too. One from a family friend: "Rachel, I don't know what's going on, but your sister's really distraught. Can you just put this behind you?" And one from Emma, the first I'd received directly from the kids. It was short, hesitant, clearly drafted under Jessica's watchful eye. "Aunt Rachel, Mom says you're mad at us. I hope you're okay. I miss you." That one I did save. I didn't respond, but I saved it. Because buried inside the manipulation and the guilt was a flicker of something real, a kid who had no idea what games the adults were playing. And then came Jessica's voicemail. It came on a Sunday night, around 8. I was drinking tea, trying to finish a novel I'd started 3 times and abandoned each time for lack of concentration, when my phone lit up with her name, the name I had seen in my phone for years. always attached to drama or need or some new crisis she dragged into her orbit. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. But I listened to it almost immediately, a mix of dread and sick curiosity settling in my stomach as her voice came through, shaky and deliberate. "Rachel," she said, "I know you think I was trying to hurt you. But that's not true. I was trying to set boundaries. You were always so judgmental, always so cold. I didn't know how to be around you anymore. I wanted my kids to have peace, to have holidays that didn't end in lectures and side-eyes. I didn't think you'd take it this far. I didn't think you'd cut them off. They're just kids, Rachel. You're punishing them for something I said. I mean, what kind of person does that? I know you're hurt, but so am I. And now Dad's calling me crying every night because he thinks he's lost you too." She paused there, and for a second I thought the message had ended, but then her voice returned, softer now. "You always said Mom protected me too much. Maybe you were right. But that doesn't mean you have to destroy everything. Come back. Please. We can fix this." I listened to that message twice. Not because I was tempted to believe her, I wasn't, but because I wanted to hear the exact tone, the precise cadence of a woman who still didn't understand the difference between setting a boundary and issuing a public rejection dressed as concern. She hadn't apologized. Not really. She had reframed. She had justified. And she had, in the most skillful way possible, tried to make herself the victim of a situation she alone had detonated. By that point, the story they were telling about me had already begun to circulate through the extended family, the whispers about how I had become bitter, unstable, vengeful. The kind of woman who lets resentment fester until it curdles into cruelty. It was predictable. It was lazy. And it was exactly what they needed to believe in order to avoid facing their own entitlement and hypocrisy. But I knew the truth. I hadn't cut them off out of vengeance. I hadn't vanished out of spite. I had simply removed myself from a system that had depended on my silence, my money, my time, and my compliance for far too long. And if that made me the villain in their story, then maybe they should have treated me like more than a supporting character. There's something that happens, deep and irreversible, when you finally realize that you have nothing left to lose, not because life has taken everything from you, but because you've made the conscious, calculated decision to set it all down. To walk away from the weight you've been dragging like a dead limb for years, the kind of burden everyone else pretends not to see because they benefit from you carrying it. That was the clarity I reached in the weeks following Jessica's voicemail, in the wake of my father's pleading messages, in the silence that had once felt terrifying but now felt like the truest kind of peace I had ever known. And in that space, unbothered by obligation, free from the expectation of performance, detached from their endless appetite for more, I finally saw it for what it was. I hadn't just given them money, support, or attention over the years. I had given them a life. One that I had built, protected, and quietly subsidized. And now I had taken it back. Not because I was cruel. Not because I wanted to teach a lesson, or play God, or exact some cinematic revenge that would make for a juicy family legend. I did it because they had mistaken my silence for weakness for too long, and because I had, for the first time in decades, decided that I was done enabling people who would never, not in a million years, do the same for me. That realization came into sharp focus on a Wednesday afternoon, when I received a formal letter forwarded by my estate attorney. It wasn't threatening, not explicitly, just a carefully worded request from Jessica's lawyer, inquiring about the unexplained hold on her children's trust funds and asking whether it might be prudent to arrange a family meeting to address lingering grievances in a private, cooperative setting. It was manipulative, of course, and strategic, and so very on brand. A lawyer would never have been called in if Jessica thought she still had emotional leverage. But now that her words no longer reached me, now that her tears and guilt trips fell into the void of blocked numbers and unread emails, she turned to paper and protocol, hoping that the system might coax me back into compliance where sentiment had failed. I didn't respond directly. I called my lawyer, reviewed the legal standing of the trust, confirmed, again, that it was fully within my rights to freeze distributions indefinitely. And then I sent a single message through official channels. stating that the grantor of the trust had lost confidence in the stewardship of its beneficiaries' guardians and was therefore halting all activity pending a long-term restructuring of the account's purpose. No apology. No explanation. Just fact. But what really closed the door, what made the silence ring louder than any shouted goodbye, was the call I made to my father the following night. I knew he wouldn't answer right away. His generation doesn't pick up numbers they don't recognize, and I had already blocked mine on his phone, but I left a voicemail, long and deliberate, not cruel, not angry, just finished. Dad, I said, my voice steady even though my hands shook a little, I know you probably think I've lost my mind, or that I've let bitterness poison whatever was left between us, but the truth is, this isn't new. It's just the first time I've said no and actually meant it. You spent your whole life teaching history, cataloging the mistakes of dead men, warning students not to repeat them. But when it came to our own family, you closed your eyes every time Jessica twisted the truth, every time she played victim, every time she manipulated you and Mom into believing she was just fragile, just sensitive, just misunderstood. And I stood there again and again, absorbing the blame, fixing the mess, writing the checks, cleaning up after her disasters, all while being told I was the problem because I didn't smile while doing it. I paused there, the silence on the line somehow weightier than his voice ever was, and then continued, I loved those kids. I still do, in a way that I don't expect anyone else in this family to understand, because love to me was always about action, showing up, paying bills, sacrificing time and money and sleep to make sure someone else was okay. But when their mother stood up and labeled me too negative for family events, not one person said, that's not fair. Not even you. And in that moment, I realized that I could spend the rest of my life earning your love the way I've always tried to, quietly, invisibly, thoroughly, or I could stop. So I stopped. The message ended without a goodbye. I didn't need one. The finality wasn't in the words, it was in the act of saying them at all. In the days that followed, I didn't expect an answer and I didn't get one. No callbacks. No letters. No public apology or tearful reunion. Just silence. But this time, it was the kind of silence I could live with. It wasn't the anxious silence of waiting for approval, or the exhausted silence after another fight, or the resentful silence of someone biting their tongue to keep the peace. It was peace itself. Because nothing feels better than reclaiming what was always yours to begin with, your time, your space, your name, your story. I think about them sometimes, Jessica, Dad, the kids, not with hatred, not even with sorrow, but with the strange detachment of someone who has finally understood that being needed is not the same as being loved. They needed me. Desperately. And they called it love because it was easier than facing the truth, that their version of family required someone to stay small so they could feel big. That someone had always been me. Now, when I wake up, the world feels bigger. Not because the problems are gone, but because I'm no longer shrinking myself to fit inside other people's expectations. I cook for one. I pay only my own bills. I walk into my home knowing no one is taking from me in the background. And maybe the saddest part, or maybe the most liberating, is realizing just how much of my energy had been spent on people who only saw me clearly after I disappeared. There will always be people who say I went too far. That freezing the trust fund was petty. That cutting ties without explanation was cruel. That walking away from the only family I had left was some kind of emotional suicide. But those people weren't there for the years I was the glue and the scapegoat, the provider and the villain, the savior and the burden, all at once. Let them judge. Let them whisper. Let them build whatever story they need to make sense of a world where a woman like me no longer plays the part they assigned her. Because I'm not playing anymore. And for the first time in my life, the silence isn't empty. It's mine.